8 years. 8 years of silence. No birthday calls. No Christmas messages. No checking in. And then last Tuesday at 11:47 in the morning my phone lit up. Dad. I stared at it for the full 30 seconds it rang. Then I put it face down on my desk and went back to work. That single moment, that one decision took me 8 years to earn. And I want to tell you exactly how I got there. My dad's name is Gerald. And for most of my childhood I genuinely looked up to him. He built a small manufacturing business from nothing in the late 90s. Employed about 40 people at its peak. In our town he was someone. People respected him. He walked into rooms like he owned them. And at home, he expected the same energy from his sons. There were 3 of us. Daniel the oldest, that's me. Then Marcus 2 years younger. Then little brother Theo 5 years after that. Marcus and Theo were built for my dad's world. Numbers, structure, discipline. Marcus went straight into finance after college. Theo followed him 3 years later. Dad couldn't have been prouder. Me. I was different from the start. I was always drawing plans. Business ideas. Revenue models on notebook paper at 14 years old. I didn't want to work for someone else's company. I wanted to build my own. My dad thought it was a phase. Daniel's got his head in the clouds again, he'd say at dinner. Always laughing. Always like it was a joke. I smiled through it for years. The breaking point came when I was 22. I had spent 6 months developing a business plan for a regional logistics company. Small scale, connecting local manufacturers to suppliers across 3 counties. I'd done the market research. I had 2 potential clients already interested. I needed $8,000 to register the business, get insurance, and put a deposit on a second-hand van. I went to my dad. Not as a son begging. As a businessman presenting a plan. I laid out everything on the kitchen table. Projections. Client letters. Cost breakdowns. He looked at it for maybe 90 seconds. Then he slid it back across the table and said, "This is a poor man's dream, Daniel. You want to drive a van for a living? This is what you've been working on." I told him this wasn't about driving a van. It was about building something. He shook his head and said, and I remember every single word, "You'll never amount to anything chasing ideas like this. You're an embarrassment to everything I've built. If you walk out that door to go play businessman, don't bother coming back." I looked at my mom. She was staring at her plate. I looked at Marcus. He looked away. I folded up my business plan, put it in my jacket pocket, and I walked out the door. I want to be honest about what came next because I think people skip this part in these kinds of stories. It wasn't a movie montage. It wasn't clean. The first 3 months I slept on my friend Marcus, different Marcus, my college friend, his couch. I had $340 in my bank account and a business plan my own father had laughed at. I took every delivery job I could find to save money. Groceries, furniture, medical supplies. I didn't care what it was. I drove it. After 4 months I had enough to register the business. I called it Greystone Logistics. I liked the name. It sounded solid. My first real client was a small furniture manufacturer 2 towns over. They needed weekly deliveries to 4 retail stores. It paid $1,100 a month. I lived off that for 8 months while I found the next client. My mom called occasionally. Always brief. Always when Dad wasn't home. She'd ask if I was eating. I'd tell her I was fine. She never pushed harder than that. Through her I heard updates I never asked for. Dad's business was growing. Marcus had gotten a promotion. Theo was engaged. Life back home was moving forward like I'd never existed. I used every single update as fuel. By year 2 I had 3 clients and had hired my first driver. A guy named Pete who was 54 years old, recently redundant, and the most reliable human being I've ever met. By year 3, 4 drivers. 2 warehouse storage contracts. I moved out of Marcus's place and into a small flat of my own. Year 4, I landed a contract with a regional supermarket chain. 12 delivery routes per week. That was the moment I knew Greystone was real. I remember sitting in my car in the car park after signing that contract. I thought about that kitchen table. I thought about those 90 seconds my dad spent looking at my plan before deciding I'd never amount to anything. I didn't feel angry. I felt something quieter than that. I felt certain. By year 6, Greystone had 23 full-time employees. We'd expanded into 2 neighboring regions. Annual revenue was sitting just over $2.1 million. I never told anyone in my family. Not my mom. Not Marcus. Not Theo. I wanted to build it completely on my own terms first. No one from my old life knew what I'd become. Then 3 months ago my mom called me. She was crying before she even said hello. She told me that Dad's business had collapsed. Apparently he'd taken on a silent business partner 2 years earlier to fund an expansion. The partner had been systematically moving money out of the company through a shell account. By the time anyone noticed, nearly $400,000 was gone and the partner had disappeared. The business folded within 6 weeks. They'd had to remortgage the house. Marcus and Theo had helped where they could, but they had their own families now. Things were genuinely difficult. She asked me, very quietly, if there was anything I could do. I told her I needed a few days to think. I sat with it for 3 days. On the third day, before I'd even called her back, Dad called me himself. First time in 8 years. I stared at the phone. I thought about that kitchen table. I thought about Pete, my first driver, who believed in Greystone before I even had a second client. I thought about every 5 a.m. delivery I did alone in the rain in year 1. And I answered. Daniel, he said. Like no time had passed. Like it was completely normal. Dad, I said. There was a pause. Then, I hear you've done well for yourself. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Not, I've missed you. I hear you've done well for yourself. I waited. He cleared his throat and said, things have gotten difficult here. I was hoping we could talk about whether you might be in a position to help. No apology. 8 years of silence and no apology. I took a long breath. And then I said, Dad, I'm sorry to hear things are difficult. I genuinely am. But I run a business. I can't take on risks that aren't going to pay off. I have to protect what I've built. Silence. Those were your exact words to me 8 years ago. Not mine. I heard him breathe. Then I said, I hope things get easier. And I hung up. I want to be careful here because I know how this kind of story can sound. I'm not celebrating my dad losing his business. I'm not happy he's struggling. But there is something I feel, and I think it's important to name it honestly. I feel free. For the first time since I was 22 years old, I feel completely free of needing anything from him. Not approval. Not acknowledgement. Not even an apology anymore. That phone call closed something in me that had been open for 8 years. My mom and I speak every week now. I've quietly helped her with some bills, directly into her account. She knows not to mention it to Dad. She's never asked me to explain myself, and I've never asked her to choose sides. Marcus reached out a few weeks after Dad called me. He'd heard what happened on the call. He didn't say much, just, I should have said something that day at the kitchen table. I told him it was fine. It actually was. Theo sent me a text last week. First contact in 8 years. Just, congrats on what you've built. Seriously. 2 words from people I grew up with meaning more than I expected. As for Dad, he hasn't called back. If you've watched this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone tell you, someone who was supposed to believe in you, that you weren't going to make it? Because I think a lot of people carry those words for a long time. Longer than they should. What I know now, 8 years later, 23 employees later, $2 million later, is this. The people who doubt you loudest are usually the most afraid of being wrong. Don't prove them right by stopping. Prove them wrong by never mentioning it. Just build. If this story hit you anywhere, subscribe. I drop real stories like this every single day. And drop a comment below. I read every single one.